Before Charles Ponzi ever lent his name to a scheme, before regulators understood how to define financial fraud, a structured financial scam had already perfected the blueprint. It did not rely on chaos, it relied on design. It promised controlled returns, it promised privileged access, it promised that money could multiply without producing anything of value. Investors believed they were entering a new financial innovation. In reality, they were entering the first fully structured pyramid scam. Money flowed upward, confidence flowed downward, and at the top, one architect understood a principle that would outlive him. As long as new capital continues to arrive, collapse can be delayed. This was not accidental deception, it was engineered sequencing. Long before the phrase Ponzi scheme existed, the mechanics of pyramid finance were already operating, quietly, convincingly, and in the absence of clear law. Participants saw paperwork, they saw statements, they saw payments that appeared legitimate. What they did not see was that those payments were not profits, they were transfers from the newest layer to the earliest one. And when the flow of new participants slowed, the structure did not weaken gradually, it failed all at once. The collapse did more than expose fraud, it exposed a system, a recruitment structure disguised as investment. This is the story of the pyramid scam that existed before Ponzi, and the architecture that would be reused for more than a century. Before the pyramid scam became famous, it became possible. It emerged in an economy where regulation lagged behind innovation, where financial instruments multiplied faster than oversight, and where participation in markets felt like entry into modernity. The late 19th century was an age of expansion. Railroads stretched across continents. Telegraph wires compressed distance. Newspapers traveled faster than truth could be verified. Speculation became normalized. Opportunity became language. Risk became aspirational. In this environment, recruitment-based finance did not appear irrational. It appeared efficient. Capital was scarce for many. Access to early-stage ventures was limited. Information moved unevenly. A structure that promised inclusion, that allowed ordinary participants to enter early, felt like democratization. But inclusion was conditional. Returns were not tied to production, they were tied to participation. The value of the structure depended not on goods, not on services, but on continuous expansion. This was the economic soil in which the pyramid model took root. There were no standardized securities disclosures, no consistent federal oversight, no unified definition of financial fraud. Paper contracts carried authority, stamped documents carried trust. A regular payout, even a small one, created legitimacy. Early participants were paid using the contributions of later ones. But because the economy itself was expanding, because new participants were always available, the structure appeared sustainable. Industrial growth masked structural fragility. Urbanization created dense social networks. Church groups, fraternal orders, trade associations all became distribution channels for opportunity. Trust did not need to be manufactured, it already existed. And when recruitment aligns with trust, skepticism weakens. The pyramid model did not begin as a spectacle. It began as a quiet adaptation to an unregulated marketplace. It thrived not because people were naive, but because the surrounding system lacked friction. No centralized reporting, no transparency requirements, no real-time verification. In such an environment, exponential recruitment can grow unnoticed. The early pyramid scam did not exploit chaos. It exploited structural delay, the delay between financial innovation and institutional response. By the time regulators understood what they were observing, the structure had already demonstrated how powerfully recruitment could mimic investment. The conditions that allowed it were not unusual. They were modern. The first pyramid structure did not emerge from a crowd. It emerged from a designer. Every durable financial deception begins with architecture, not slogans, not excitement, architecture. The early pyramid scam required more than recruitment. It required sequencing. It required controlled payouts. It required the appearance of balance. At the center stood an organizer who understood leverage, not mechanical leverage, but human leverage. He understood that most participants do not study structure, they study outcomes. If the first layer is paid reliably, the second layer will arrive willingly. The architect did not invent greed. He engineered patience. Early investors were selected carefully. They were paid on time. They were encouraged to speak about their experience, but never about the mechanics. Scarcity was introduced deliberately. Access was limited. Participation windows were brief. Exclusivity created urgency. Urgency accelerated recruitment. The structure itself was simple. Each participant contributed capital. A portion moved upward. A portion was reserved to fund early returns. The remainder sustained the appearance of operational stability. There were no factories, no commodities, no underlying productive asset. The system relied on flow. As long as new participants entered at a faster rate than withdrawals, the illusion held. The architect understood ratios. He understood that exponential expansion does not look dangerous at first, it looks impressive. Early payouts were not profits, they were positioning costs. But participants did not perceive themselves as position holders, they perceived themselves as investors. The difference was structural. The architect also understood trust networks. He recruited individuals who were already embedded in communities, teachers, clerks, business owners, men whose reputations functioned as collateral. Reputation reduced friction. Friction slows expansion. Expansion was the only true asset the structure possessed. When growth slowed, the organizer did not panic. He adjusted timing. He delayed withdrawals. He promised larger future returns. The pyramid did not collapse because the architect miscalculated. It collapsed because exponential growth eventually encounters arithmetic limits. But at its origin, the structure was disciplined, intentional, methodical. This was not spontaneous fraud. It was financial engineering without production. The success of the early pyramid did not depend on numbers first. It depended on persuasion. Before expansion, there had to be belief. And belief is rarely built through mathematics. It is built through familiarity. The earliest investors were not approached as strangers. They were approached as peers. The organizer did not advertise to the desperate. He recruited the credible. Local merchants, clerks, respected members of associations, individuals whose participation would signal safety to others. Trust traveled faster than evidence. Meetings were small. Explanations were structured. Language was deliberate. The opportunity was described not as speculation, but as participation in a controlled system. Returns were framed as structured distributions. Timing was emphasized. Process was emphasized. Complexity was avoided. The structure was presented as orderly, predictable, disciplined. Early participants were told they were part of a limited circle. Access would not remain open indefinitely. Scarcity created urgency. Urgency shortened analysis. Initial contributions were modest, small enough to feel manageable, large enough to feel serious. When the first payouts occurred, they were precise, on time, documented, verified in person. The payout was the most powerful marketing tool the structure possessed. Once someone receives money, skepticism declines sharply. Recipients became advocates, not because they were instructed to, but because they believed they had discovered something early. The scheme did not require deception at every step. It required selective disclosure. Participants understood that new members were joining. They did not understand that new members were the source of their returns. Language blurred the distinction. Terms like allocation, rotation, cycle, distribution, none of them described profit generation. All of them described movement. Movement felt active. Active felt legitimate. The organizer reinforced discipline. Withdrawals were encouraged to remain inside the system. Reinvestment was praised as commitment. Commitment strengthened the structure. Reinvestment accelerated expansion. By the time doubt surfaced in isolated individuals, their own successful payout undermined their hesitation. Personal experience outweighed abstract warning. The pyramid grew not because people ignored risk, but because they trusted evidence presented directly to them. The evidence was real. The interpretation was not. Fraud becomes durable when it produces paperwork. The early pyramid did not rely on secrecy. It relied on documentation. Participants received receipts. They received statements. They received schedules that mapped out expected returns with precision. Paper creates weight. Ink creates authority. A written projection feels more stable than a verbal promise. The organizer understood this instinctively. Each contribution was recorded. Each payout was logged. Each participant was assigned a position within a visible structure. Nothing appeared hidden. The structure looked orderly because it was orderly. The deception did not exist in the records. It existed in the source of the funds. Statements showed gains. Balances increased. Cycles appeared to complete successfully. But the numbers reflected movement, not productivity. There was no factory output, no commodity trade, no asset generating revenue. The appearance of return was created by redistribution. Documentation obscured origin. Participants did not audit flow. They verified paperwork. A stamped certificate satisfied more effectively than a balance sheet would have. The pyramid adopted the language of legitimate enterprise. Terms such as allocation, distribution, membership tier, priority position. These words suggested hierarchy within a system. They did not suggest extraction. When delays occurred, they were explained as timing adjustments. When payouts accelerated, they were described as efficiency improvements. Language softened risk. Visual structure reinforced confidence. Charts showed upward movement. Diagrams showed expansion. Printed projections extended into future months. The future appeared mapped. In reality, the projection depended entirely on continued recruitment. But documentation shifted attention away from recruitment. It shifted focus toward structure. Structure implied sustainability. Participants began to measure success by how complete the paperwork felt. Well-formatted records replaced fundamental questions. Few asked where the revenue originated. Fewer demanded proof of external profit. The system did not need to hide its mechanics. It needed only to normalize them. By presenting transfer as return, by presenting rotation as yield, the pyramid embedded itself inside routine expectation. The collapse did not begin when confidence failed. It began when documentation could no longer mask arithmetic. Until then, paper carried the illusion forward. The pyramid did not grow because of returns. It grew because of recruitment. At a certain point, profit became secondary. Expansion became essential. Every new participant did two things simultaneously. They injected capital, and they extended the base. The structure required constant enlargement. Without enlargement, it stalled. Recruitment was not presented as obligation. It was framed as opportunity sharing. Participants were encouraged to introduce others, to extend access, to offer inclusion. Language softened extraction. But mathematically, each layer required a larger one beneath it. If 3 investors entered at the second tier, 9 were required beneath them, then 27, then 81. Growth accelerated invisibly at first, then visibly, then uncontrollably. No participants saw the entire structure. They saw only their immediate circle. The organizer understood this segmentation. Information was distributed horizontally, never vertically. Members knew who recruited them. They did not know how many layers already existed. This limited awareness delayed alarm. Social networks became conduits: families, colleagues, religious associations, trade circles. Recruitment worked best where trust already existed. The most persuasive advocates were not the architect. They were satisfied participants. Early payout recipients became living advertisements. Success stories circulated faster than warnings. Each new entry validated previous decisions. Each successful payout reinforced the narrative of sustainability. But recruitment altered incentives. Participants no longer focused solely on returns. They focused on growth. The faster the base expanded, the faster payouts appeared to stabilize. Momentum became proof. When someone hesitated, they were shown evidence of expansion: charts, lists, active meetings. Expansion signaled legitimacy. The structure did not sell product, it sold position. Position within an expanding system felt valuable. As long as recruitment outpaced withdrawal, the mechanism held. But recruitment is not infinite. Eventually, the pool narrows, circles overlap, prospects diminish. The same trust network that accelerated growth begins to saturate. When new entrants slow, the structure feels the pressure immediately, because recruitment was never optional. It was the engine. The early pyramid did not collapse because regulators intervened. It expanded because regulators did not understand what they were seeing. At the time, there was no unified definition of securities fraud, no standardized disclosure requirements, no federal agency tasked with examining complex financial structures. Investment activity was fragmented across states. Oversight was reactive, not anticipatory. Authorities pursued theft. They prosecuted misrepresentation. They responded to visible loss. But the pyramid did not initially present as theft. Participants received payouts. Contracts were signed voluntarily. Records were maintained. There was no hidden vault, no falsified inventory, no obvious embezzlement. Money moved exactly where documents indicated it would move. The deception was structural, not procedural. Because early participants were paid, complaints were rare. Because returns appeared consistent, suspicion lacked urgency. Law typically follows harm. The pyramid delayed harm. By the time dissatisfaction emerged, the structure had already expanded across communities. Even when local officials received concerns, the explanation appeared simple: a membership-based distribution model, operating through mutual contribution. Mutual contribution did not immediately resemble criminal conduct. In the absence of clear statutory language, enforcement hesitated. Courts required demonstration of intent. They required proof of deception. But participants often defended the organizer. They had documentation. They had personal payouts. They had evidence that seemed legitimate. Legal frameworks at the time were designed to evaluate tangible assets: land, goods, corporate shares. They were not designed to evaluate exponential recruitment systems. Recruitment itself was not illegal. Profit expectation was not illegal. Collective pooling of funds was not illegal. The pyramid existed in the space between definitions. It exploited regulatory delay, the gap between innovation and interpretation. Officials struggled to classify it. Was it a club, a cooperative, a speculative association? By the time its mechanics became clear, the losses were already distributed across hundreds of participants. Regulation eventually adapted. Definitions expanded. Disclosure standards hardened. But the first pyramid demonstrated something critical. If a financial structure evolves faster than legal language, it can operate openly while remaining fundamentally unsustainable. Institutional blindness was not incompetence, it was temporal lag. The law was not designed for exponential arithmetic. The pyramid was. The most powerful force inside the pyramid was not greed, it was timing. Participants believed they were early, and in any exponential structure, being early changes everything. The organizer did not promise universal success, he implied advantage. Entry was framed as position. Position implied hierarchy. Hierarchy implied priority. Those who entered first appeared disciplined. Those who entered later appeared fortunate. Those who hesitated appeared cautious. No one believed they were late. The phrase "getting in early" carried psychological weight. It suggested intelligence. It suggested foresight. It suggested access. Early participants were paid visibly. Their success became proof of concept. But their success was structural, not strategic. In a recruitment-based system, the earliest layer is mathematically advantaged, not because of skill, because of sequence. Sequence creates asymmetry. Those at the base must support those above them. Those above require continual expansion beneath. Yet participants evaluated success through individual experience. If someone invested modestly and received more in return, the model felt validated. Personal gain overrode structural analysis. The organizer reinforced this perception carefully. He emphasized momentum. He displayed growth charts. He referenced increasing participation numbers. Expansion created urgency. When membership lists lengthened, hesitation felt costly. To delay entry meant surrendering potential advantage. The illusion of timing converted doubt into action. Even cautious individuals reasoned that entering sooner was safer than entering later. But exponential systems do not reward caution, they reward position. The number of required participants grows rapidly. Few participants calculate the full expansion path. By the fifth or sixth layer, the required base exceeds realistic population pools. Yet no individual participant sees the entire tree. They see their branch. They see their neighbors. They see visible payouts. Psychological anchoring locks perception to immediate evidence. When someone receives payment, they rarely ask whether the structure can sustain universal payment. They ask whether their own position is secure. Security becomes personal. Risk becomes collective. The early pyramid thrived because it individualized reward while distributing vulnerability. Each participant believed timing protected them. But timing only determines who falls last. The structure itself determines that someone must. By the sixth layer, the structure required more participants than most towns could provide. This was the flaw hidden in plain sight. The pyramid did not fail because of betrayal. It failed because of arithmetic. Each participant recruited 3. Those 3 recruited 3 more. Then 9 became 27. 27 became 81. 81 became 243. The numbers did not rise gradually, they accelerated. By the 10th layer, the structure required nearly 60,000 participants. By the 15th, it exceeded 14 million. No recruitment-based system can sustain that trajectory. But no single participant sees layer 15. They see their layer, their recruiter, their payout. Exponential growth feels manageable at the beginning. It feels energetic. It feels alive. Only when expansion slows does arithmetic become visible. The early pyramid relied on geometric progression. Layer 1 required 3 beneath it, Layer 2 required 9, Layer 3 required 27. The pattern is predictable, the consequences are not. Because human networks are finite, a town contains a limited population, a region contains a limited population, even a nation contains limits. Yet exponential recruitment expands as if population were infinite. This mismatch between mathematical growth and social capacity is the structural impossibility at the center of every pyramid. At first, expansion conceals the imbalance. New entrants arrive faster than withdrawals, payments appear stable, confidence strengthens. But exponential systems do not plateau gently, they approach vertical acceleration. Once the required recruitment base exceeds available participants, the structure does not slow gracefully, it collapses sharply. The pyramid does not fail at the top, it fails at the bottom. Those who enter last encounter a closed system. No remaining recruits, no inflow, no distribution. The early layers are protected by sequence. The final layers absorb the deficit. This is not mismanagement, it is inevitability. The pyramid's true design was not financial, it was mathematical, and mathematics does not negotiate. At its peak, the pyramid did not look fragile, it looked unstoppable. Meetings were full, payouts were regular, recruitment lists expanded faster than doubts could form. Growth created its own narrative. When participation increases, observers assume validation. When payouts continue, critics appear premature. The expansion phase is the most convincing stage of any pyramid structure. Capital flows in from multiple directions. New members bring enthusiasm. Early members bring testimonials. Momentum replaces scrutiny. Charts show upward movement. Attendance numbers rise. Waiting lists form. Scarcity reappears, not because access is limited, but because demand outpaces space. The organizer reinforces the signal. He references participation totals. He highlights recent distributions. He emphasizes stability. Participants begin measuring success by scale. A larger base suggests durability. A growing network suggests strength. But scale in a pyramid does not represent productivity, it represents dependency. Each new participant increases obligation. Expansion temporarily masks structural imbalance. When recruitment accelerates, cash reserves appear abundant. Withdrawals are processed without delay. Confidence peaks. This is the moment when the structure appears safest. Late entrants observe visible proof. They see crowded rooms. They see satisfied members. They see documentation. They conclude that risk has diminished. In reality, risk has intensified. Because at maximum expansion, the required next layer is larger than any previous layer. Acceleration narrows the window of sustainability. The organizer may not express concern. He may even believe the structure can continue. Growth produces optimism. Optimism delays caution. But beneath the visible momentum, the mathematical base widens beyond reach. Prospects begin to overlap. Social circles repeat. Recruitment conversations encounter familiarity. The structure is largest precisely when it is closest to failure. Yet participants feel secure. Because collapse does not announce itself, it waits for inflow to hesitate. The expansion phase is not evidence of strength, it is the final acceleration before arithmetic asserts itself. The warning signs did not appear suddenly, they appeared gradually and were dismissed. Delays began as minor adjustments, a payout postponed by a week, a distribution rescheduled for administrative reasons. Participants accepted the explanation. Growth had conditioned them to expect stability. Stability had conditioned them to trust timing shifts. Questions were framed as impatience. Concern was framed as misunderstanding. The structure did not deny stress, it reinterpreted it. Recruitment began to slow subtly. Meetings were still full, but fewer new faces appeared. Existing members were encouraged to expand their outreach, to contact distant acquaintances, to revisit prior conversations. Saturation is rarely acknowledged. It is described as a temporary lull. Paperwork remained orderly. Ledgers remained balanced. Statements continued to circulate. Documentation masked strain. Participants noticed small irregularities. Processing times lengthened. Withdrawal requests were encouraged to remain reinvested. Reinvestment was praised as loyalty. Withdrawal was framed as short-term thinking. Social pressure reinforced compliance. No one wanted to be the first to signal doubt. No one wanted to undermine collective momentum. The structure relied on shared optimism. When isolated individuals expressed concern, their own previous payouts weakened their argument. They had benefited. They had recommended others. To question the system meant questioning themselves. Cognitive commitment deepened detachment. As new participants became harder to recruit, the language shifted. Returns were described as entering a new phase. Distribution schedules were described as recalibration. Technical terminology softened instability. Meanwhile, the base continued widening. Each new payout required increasingly precise timing. Small miscalculations carried larger consequences, but the organizer maintained composure. Composure signaled control. Participants evaluated tone more than numbers. If the leader remained calm, panic seemed unnecessary. The warning signs were visible. They simply did not align with expectation. People do not abandon a working system easily, especially when their own experience has been positive. By the time skepticism consolidated, the structural imbalance was no longer reversible. The warning signs had been present. They had been rationalized, and rationalization postponed response. The first visible crack did not look dramatic. It looked administrative. A payout was delayed longer than expected. An explanation felt rehearsed. A response arrived slower than before. Individually, each moment appeared manageable. Collectively, they signaled strain. The pyramid depended on precise timing. When inflow slowed even slightly, outflow became harder to coordinate. Participants who had once received distributions on schedule now received reassurances instead. Reassurance is inexpensive. Liquidity is not. Meetings shifted in tone. Questions increased. Answers lengthened. The organizer introduced new adjustments: temporary holding periods, revised distribution cycles, updated participation tiers. Each modification was framed as improvement, but structural change inside a recruitment system usually signals imbalance. Participants began noticing overlap in their outreach. The same names resurfaced. The same social circles repeated. Recruitment conversations became harder to initiate. Growth requires novelty. Novelty was diminishing. Some participants attempted to withdraw fully. Their requests were deferred. They were encouraged to remain patient. Patience protects the structure. Withdrawal exposes it. Documentation continued. Statements were issued. Charts were displayed. But the energy shifted. Confidence had been automatic. Now it required reinforcement. Early members reassured later members. Later members watched early members carefully. The base was no longer expanding at the required pace. Exponential systems cannot slow gently. They are either accelerating or destabilizing. The first cracks were not visible in headlines. They were visible in timing. Cash moved more cautiously. Promises extended further into the future. The organizer may have believed the slowdown was temporary. Participants hoped it was. Hope substitutes for analysis during decline. But the arithmetic did not change. The required next layer was larger than the available network. And when the structure can no longer widen, pressure concentrates at the bottom. The first crack is rarely noise. It is compression. Compression precedes fracture. The collapse did not begin with silence. It began with urgency. Withdrawals increased. Recruitment slowed. and liquidity tightened at the base. Participants who had once reinvested automatically now requested distribution. Confidence shifted from expansion to preservation. The structure depended on continuous inflow. When inflow hesitated, outflow accelerated. Cash reserves thinned rapidly. The organizer attempted to slow withdrawals. Temporary freezes were introduced. Processing queues lengthened. Explanations were issued. Delays were described as technical adjustments. But timing exposes instability faster than language can conceal it. As more members requested payout, fewer new members entered. The imbalance widened daily. Meetings became tense, voices rose, reassurances lost effectiveness. Participants compared notes. They realized that delays were not isolated. The bottom layers felt the pressure first. Those who entered late discovered there were no recruits left beneath them. Their position had value only while expansion continued. Without new capital, the distribution cycle stopped. Payments scheduled for 1 week were postponed to the next, then postponed again. The flow of money, once steady, became intermittent. Intermittent flow destroys confidence quickly. Rumors spread faster than official statements. Participants who had recruited friends and family now faced confrontation. Trust networks reversed direction. The same social channels that accelerated growth amplified alarm. Liquidity collapse does not require fraud to be revealed. It requires arithmetic to assert itself. When contributions no longer exceed withdrawals, the structure cannot function. The pyramid did not fall gradually. It stalled, then it seized. Office doors closed temporarily, then permanently. Some participants recovered their initial investment. Many did not. Sequence determined outcome. The organizer may have attempted repair, but exponential decline mirrors exponential growth. Once contraction begins, it accelerates. The collapse did not surprise mathematics. It surprised those who believed timing protected them. Liquidity is the final illusion. When it disappears, so does belief. The realization did not arrive as revelation. It arrived as convergence. Isolated complaints became collective acknowledgement. Participants who had defended the structure now compared their experiences. Delays were no longer individual inconveniences, they were systemic. The language shifted. What had once been described as adjustment was now described as obstruction. What had been framed as patience was now perceived as avoidance. Newspapers began to report inconsistencies. Local officials reopened inquiries. Public meetings turned confrontational. The structure had not changed overnight. Perception had. Confidence is resilient when doubt is isolated. It collapses when doubt becomes shared. Participants revisited earlier assurances. They re-examined documentation. They recalculated expected returns. The arithmetic they had once ignored now became unavoidable. If every layer required a larger one beneath it, then someone was guaranteed to lose. The final entrants understood their position. They were not early. They were terminal. The phrase investment opportunity was replaced by another word, scam. The public application of that word transformed interpretation. What had been structured distribution was reinterpreted as transfer without production. What had appeared innovative now appeared extractive. The organizer's composure no longer signaled confidence, it signaled control without solution. Community relations strained. Those who had recruited neighbors faced anger. Those who had reinvested, encouraged others to do the same, faced accountability. The pyramid did not merely collapse financially, it collapsed socially. Trust networks fractured. Reputation, once leveraged to accelerate growth, became liability. Legal proceedings intensified. Documents were subpoenaed. Testimony revealed internal sequencing. Participants recognized a pattern larger than their own experience. The structure had not been designed for universal success. It had been designed for layered distribution. The realization was not that losses occurred, it was that losses were inevitable from inception. The term pyramid scheme had not yet entered common language, but the structure had already defined it. Once the structure was publicly understood, response accelerated. Legal action followed recognition. Complaints consolidated. Records were seized. Testimony formalized what participants had experienced informally. The organizers' intent became central. Prosecutors did not argue that money had moved. Money had clearly moved. They argued that the movement had no external source, no revenue-producing asset, no independent profit stream, no underlying economic engine. The defense often relied on participation consent. Members had entered voluntarily. Contracts had been signed. Payments had been made to many. But consent does not neutralize structural impossibility. Courts began focusing on representation. Were returns described as profit? Was recruitment essential but undisclosed? Was sustainability implied? The early pyramid existed before refined securities law, so legal reasoning adapted case by case. Judges examined documentation. They reviewed flow patterns. They traced contribution chains. The central conclusion emerged slowly. If returns depend primarily on new participants, the structure cannot function universally. This reasoning would later shape regulatory definitions, but in this early case, punishment varied. Some organizers faced fraud charges. Others faced civil liability. Some avoided severe consequence due to vague statutes. Participants rarely recovered full losses. Assets were insufficient. Records were incomplete. Distribution of remaining funds created further dispute. The aftermath exposed a recurring pattern. Early entrants often exited with gains. Late entrants absorbed disproportionate loss. This asymmetry was not accidental. It was inherent. Public reaction extended beyond the courtroom. Communities revised trust practices. Associations became cautious. Informal investment clubs faced skepticism. Regulators began drafting clearer definitions. Disclosure expectations increased. Reporting standards evolved gradually. The collapse did not immediately eliminate pyramid structures, but it altered awareness. The first structured pyramid did more than redistribute capital. It forced legal systems to confront recruitment-based finance. Law, like participants, learned after exposure. The structure had already demonstrated its limits. The response attempted to prevent repetition. History would show how incomplete that prevention remained. The first pyramid did not end the model. It refined it. Subsequent frauds did not need to invent new structures. They inherited a template. Recruitment-based distribution, early payouts to build credibility, documentation to simulate legitimacy, expansion framed as opportunity. The essential components were already tested. Later organizers observed what worked. They adjusted scale. They adjusted language. They adjusted presentation. But the core mechanism remained intact. Returns funded by incoming participants. Momentum used as validation. Delay used as stabilization. In the decades that followed, similar structures reappeared under new names. Investment clubs, profit-sharing circles, membership rotations, mutual aid associations. Each claimed variation. Each maintained dependency on growth. The most famous later figure would be Charles Ponzi, but Ponzi did not invent the structure. He amplified it. He applied the same sequencing logic. He emphasized timing advantage. He distributed early returns rapidly. What he added was speed and publicity. The underlying architecture predated him. And after Ponzi, others adapted again. Some introduced tangible products to mask recruitment. Others embedded the structure within corporate language. The lesson absorbed by later organizers was not caution, it was optimization. How quickly can recruitment expand? How long can payouts be sustained? How can documentation be strengthened? Each iteration improved concealment. The model survived because it was flexible. It could attach itself to speculation, to commodities, to education programs, to sales organizations. It did not require invention, it required repositioning. Regulators strengthened definitions, disclosure requirements expanded, licensing tightened, yet enforcement often lagged innovation. The pyramid model exploits delay. Delay between awareness and action. Delay between growth and recognition. Delay between collapse and accountability. The first structured pyramid provided proof of concept. It demonstrated that recruitment can simulate investment convincingly. That proof was not lost on future organizers. The architecture endured. Not because it was legitimate, but because it was transferable. Charles Ponzi did not invent the pyramid, he branded it. When Ponzi operated in the early 20th century, the structure he used was already familiar. Money collected from new investors, returns paid to earlier ones, momentum framed as legitimacy. What distinguished Ponzi was visibility. He operated at scale, he operated rapidly, he operated in an environment with faster media circulation. His scheme centered on international reply coupons, a technical explanation that obscured the real mechanism. But the payout logic was not new. It mirrored the earlier recruitment-based structures that had already collapsed decades before. The difference was narrative. Ponzi positioned himself as a financial innovator. He invoked arbitrage. He referenced global price discrepancies. The earlier pyramid had relied primarily on structured tiers. Ponzi relied on technical complexity. Both depended on continuous inflow. Both rewarded early entrants. Both required exponential growth. Ponzi accelerated the cycle. He paid returns quickly. He encouraged reinvestment. He created urgency through publicity. Newspapers amplified his presence. Crowds gathered outside his offices. Scale created spectacle. But arithmetic remained unchanged. When redemption requests exceeded inflow, collapse followed. The public attached his name to the structure because his case received national attention. The term Ponzi scheme entered common language, yet the mechanics predated him. The pyramid existed before it had a brand. Branding simplified understanding. It also obscured history. By associating the structure with one man, the system appeared personal. But recruitment-based finance is structural. Remove Ponzi and the architecture remains. He industrialized timing. He accelerated distribution. He improved marketing. He did not originate dependency on exponential recruitment. The first pyramid had already proven that returns funded by new participants create temporary stability. Ponzi demonstrated that the same model could operate faster and at greater scale. History remembered the name. It should have remembered the structure. The pyramid did not disappear. It adapted. Modern recruitment-based models rarely present themselves as investment schemes. They present themselves as opportunity. Products are introduced. Branding is polished. Corporate structures are formalized. But beneath the surface, the incentive structure often mirrors the original design. Multi-level marketing organizations reward distribution. They reward sales, but they frequently reward recruitment more heavily. Compensation plans are tiered. Commissions flow upward. Bonuses depend on building a downline. The terminology is contemporary. The architecture is familiar. Participants are encouraged to build teams, to mentor new members, to expand their network. Revenue is described as entrepreneurial income. In legitimate enterprises, revenue originates from external customers. In recruitment-heavy models, revenue may originate primarily from participants themselves. Starter kits, membership fees, internal purchases. When participant spending sustains payouts, dependency reappears. The model often remains legal because tangible products exist, but legality does not eliminate structural tension. If income depends more on recruitment than retail demand, the arithmetic resembles the early pyramid. Exponential layering still applies. Each participant requires additional participants to scale earnings. The base must widen continuously. Some modern organizations implement safeguards, buyback policies, income disclosures, compliance training. These measures attempt to reduce abuse, yet history shows recurring patterns. Growth celebrated publicly, saturation acknowledged privately, turnover absorbed quietly. Most participants earn modest returns. A small minority earn significant income. This distribution is not accidental. It reflects structural positioning. The modern pyramid does not always collapse dramatically. It often stabilizes at equilibrium, where high turnover replaces rapid expansion. New entrants replace departing ones. Momentum slows but persists. The structure survives by moderating expectations. The architecture remains recognizable. Recruitment fuels growth. Position determines outcome. Arithmetic governs sustainability. The original pyramid was explicit. The modern version is often embedded inside corporate language, but the underlying dynamic remains constant. If expansion is required for stability, the structure contains its own limit. Pyramid structures return because they align with human behavior. They do not rely on ignorance, they rely on optimism. Each generation believes it has discovered a new mechanism, a new platform, a new financial innovation. The packaging changes, the arithmetic does not. Recruitment-based systems appeal to aspiration. They promise leverage. They promise scale without proportional labor. The idea that income can expand faster than effort is persistent. Exponential growth feels modern. It feels technological. It feels efficient. But exponential recruitment is constrained by population. Why then do these structures reappear? Because they are simple to construct. They require no factory, no research, no production infrastructure. They require organization, timing, and persuasive framing. They also exploit social proof. When people observe others receiving returns, skepticism weakens. Early payouts create evidence. Evidence creates trust. Trust accelerates expansion. Each cycle benefits from temporary success stories. Even when collapse becomes visible, the narrative often isolates blame: a dishonest leader, a mismanaged branch, a failed oversight mechanism. Rarely is the structure itself interrogated. The focus on individuals obscures recurrence. Another factor is regulatory delay. Financial innovation evolves quickly. Legal language adapts slowly. Between those two timelines lies opportunity. Digital platforms amplify this gap. Global communication accelerates recruitment. Online payment systems accelerate transfer. Geographic boundaries dissolve. The structure scales faster than before. Yet the underlying limitation remains. Recruitment cannot expand infinitely. Eventually, markets saturate, attention shifts, participants hesitate, then contraction begins. The recurring appearance of pyramid models is not coincidence. It reflects alignment between structure and psychology. Optimism, imitation, timing advantage, fear of missing opportunity. These factors regenerate the model. The pyramid persists not because it is effective long-term. It persists because it works temporarily. And temporary success is often enough to restart the cycle. The pyramid scheme was never defined by a single individual. It was defined by a structure. At its core, the blueprint is simple. Returns funded by new participants. Expansion required for stability. Sequence determining outcome. The first structured pyramid demonstrated this clearly. Ponzi accelerated it. Modern variations refined it. But the underlying mechanics have not changed. Recruitment substitutes for production. Momentum substitutes for value. Documentation substitutes for verification. The illusion persists because it mimics legitimate enterprise. There are meetings, there are statements, there are payouts. For a time, it appears functional. The blueprint is durable because it is mathematically coherent in the short term. If inflow exceeds outflow, distribution can continue. If growth accelerates, confidence strengthens. But sustainability requires more than inflow. It requires external value creation. Without that anchor, the system remains closed. Closed systems redistribute. They do not generate. The inevitability of collapse is not moral, it is structural. Someone must enter last. Someone must lack a subsequent layer. The earliest pyramid did not fail because participants were foolish. It failed because arithmetic is indifferent to belief. This is the enduring lesson. Financial systems can appear stable while relying entirely on expansion. Growth can conceal imbalance. Documentation can conceal dependency. But exponential requirements eventually confront finite reality. Every pyramid, regardless of era, encounters the same boundary: population, capital, time. When any one of those limits is reached, transfer can no longer be sustained. The structure reveals itself. The blueprint survives not because it is sustainable, but because it is repeatable. Understanding the pyramid requires more than recognizing deception. It requires recognizing dependency on perpetual growth. Whenever expansion becomes the primary source of return, the architecture resembles the original design. The name may change, the technology may change, the presentation may evolve. The arithmetic does not.